Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today for episode 5. We have a really awesome guest today, and I'm on the road, and I might be losing my voice a little bit as I recover from a week in Las Vegas, but I am excited today to talk to Shay, so I'm going to let him do a lot more talking than me. But today's guest is Shay Myers. Shay is the CEO of Owyhee Produce, and he's kind of had quite the following here recently on LinkedIn and on TikTok and some other social media sites, just helping to educate more people about the produce supply chain. So very excited to have him on. We've never had a guest speak specifically about produce, and I admittedly don't know a whole lot about the produce supply chain. So I'm excited to learn more myself as well. Just a reminder that after the podcast, if you guys can't stay for the whole thing, or if you're catching this already recorded, it is posted on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. So whatever works best for you guys to go download and listen to that, please do so. And also, please feel free to share this with people you think might find it informational. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring on Shay, and we're going to get him introduced. Good morning, Shay. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing great.
Good. I appreciate you joining. I know it's a little earlier for you. So what are you, an hour or 2 hours behind?
You're Central Time right now?
Yes.
Yeah, so just an hour. It's not that far ahead, but I am not a morning person, even though, farmers are supposed to be.
I was going to say that sounds very contradictory to the industry.
I eat the Red Bull, right?
There you go. Coffee or Red Bull, yeah, both work. Well, cool. I appreciate you taking some time to join us. I really want to give you plenty of time to just introduce yourself, but also kind of introduce your company and maybe just your industry in general too, because you're not probably the typical guest that would appear on a supply chain logistics focused podcast, which is not all that I talk about here. So I'm excited to have you, but I'd love to just better understand your company and the market that you serve.
You bet. Okay. Well, to begin, I guess I'm a farm kid. This farming operation started back in the early 70s. My grandfather was a first generation farmer and wanted to get away from his family dairied. They had a dairy farm, but he wanted to get away from the animals and started working for his in-laws after the Korean War. And for him, he had this vision that was really important for him, and that was that he had a place for his children and his grandchildren to come back to, and that is how he structured the entire operation, and that's how he invested in infrastructure, and that's how he did things. And so I am kind of a product of one of his visions and one of his aspirations. And so I'm going to start by saying I think it's important for all of us to make sure that we set goals and have a vision of what our future is, because it is attainable, but we have to know what that is. And so to begin with me and how I ended up back on the farming operation, first of all, if anybody watches my videos or any of my content, I like to fly airplanes. It's part of what I do. I wanted to be a corporate pilot. That's what I wanted to do, either that or working for the airlines. And 9/11, that's right during 9/11 was when I was in college. And there was not going to be a path to be able to do that. Yeah. And so I had always been very, very proud of being the product of a farm, of being a farm kid. Yeah. But when you get to college and you get surrounded by a lot of people that don't understand farming and agriculture, you quickly find yourself kind of on your heels, because there's this real massive separation. Even going to college, well, I did part of my time at Boise State, so the folks there had a little bit of a better understanding of agriculture. But when I went back east to the University of New Hampshire, people thought that we had, a barn and some chickens and some cows running around in the yard, and that's what farming was. Yeah, like exactly. I mean, the cliches, the simple life, all of those things, they didn't understand it, and it kind of, because that put me on my heels. I'm like, I don't know if I can be that person. I don't know if I can be something that people don't understand, and that frankly, to a certain degree, they look down on. Yeah. And i.e. the product of all of the social media and the content that I create, because I think farming is really cool. Agriculture is very complicated and involved, and I want to share what that involves and what that takes. And we'll talk more about that later. But I came back to the farm in 2005. Our farming operation entails about 4,000 acres. We grow 9 different crops, from asparagus to watermelon. And onions is one of the core crops in this area. In fact, there's 1 billion pounds shipped from this area. There's about to speak to the logistics side, somewhere between 130 and 175 semi-loads per day that leave within, 25 miles of where I sit today. And but
these are
at that
numbers
point in
that
time,
when you just throw these numbers out there, it's like hard to wrap your head around like how much volume that actually is every day of onions.
I don't appreciate how much volume it really is because it's always been here, right? It's not something that I understand. But between ourselves in Washington, it's somewhere between that 150 to 350 loads a day, roughly. And then this is potato land on top of that, right? In Idaho, and that their numbers are similar, although the potato production and shipping is about an hour and a half away from where I sit here. And those numbers, are double that. So there's a lot of produce leaving the Northwest, and being that I'm kind of bouncing all over, I apologize for that.
That's okay.
Being that it's a storage crop, we have, we're shipping potatoes year round. Now, we're not a potato grower, but the guys that are growing potatoes are shipping potatoes on refrigerated trucks all year long. And then onions are 8.5 to 9 months that season. So to go back to where I was, I graduate college. The family had been growing onions, but when you grow onions or certain produce in certain areas, a lot of the time you don't actually do anything but grow the crop. It'd be like a soybean farmer or a corn farmer or even a dairy producer when they're producing their milk. They produce the product and then it goes to a packer where it's further processed, put in a bag, processed into tater tots or French fries or in onion rings or whatever the case might be. And the family knew, my grandfather and my uncle, who were at that time running the farming operation, knew that by not following that crop further along in the supply chain, by being vertically integrated, right, by following that value chain up, that we were leaving money on the table. So they knew from the time that I had talked about coming back to the farming operation that they were going to put me in charge of an onion packing facility. What they didn't know is how many mistakes I was going to make, how many things I was going to do wrong, and how much money I was going to cost them. And that's just the truth. But we did learn our lessons. And so we went from one of the smallest packing operations, grower packer shippers, to one of the largest over the course of about probably a dozen years or so. But we spoke about the verticalization, the control that we have. Like when we talk about supply chain and logistics, we were at a distinct advantage because being the grower, we cared about the quality a lot more because that affected our bottom line all the way from start to finish. And if you're, I can get into a lot of the minutia or the details in there that aren't necessary.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because I think that kind of ties in with your introduction about being maybe a family-run company that has a vision for how you want the company to operate. So, I mean, two things that stood out to me just in your LinkedIn profile that probably anyone can see when they look at your page. Your headline says supply chain transparency. So obviously that's going to catch people's attention as, I would assume that there is more transparency within what you do because you are vertically integrated, because you speak to that vertical integration as well there. But talk to me a little bit about exactly what that means. I think you kind of just touched on it, but being vertically integrated, I'm assuming allows you more visibility, more control in-house. What, as opposed to what? Like your competition is doing what, and how does that actually, does that give you guys a competitive advantage in your space to be vertically integrated? And just talk to me a little bit about that difference.
Yeah. So first of all, the vertical integration is a massive advantage because we can move and change and adapt so much more quickly. If you look at an organization where you have a grower, and then in the other hand, you have a packer, they don't always have the same ultimate or end goal in mind. The grower wants to maximize his yields or her yields, and the packer wants to maximize their sales. So there's not a motivation to deliver quality, because the poorer the quality, the more bags you get to pack, and that's how you charge the farmer. And the farmer, the more pounds they deliver to you, regardless of quality, the better they get paid. So you have this disconnect in the way that you perform and operate, and that disconnect ends up creating for more poorer quality. And so we were able to adapt and adjust and grow the sizes, the varieties, the colors, and the quality that people needed. A great example would be when we talk about COVID. A lot of that demand at retail for an onion, is a medium onion. It's a smaller onion. That's what you buy. So it comes in a 3-pound package, and it's a little, 2.5 or 3-inch onion. We were able to adapt from an equipment standpoint and the following year, even from a planting, from a population standpoint, to try and make our onions smaller so that we would have the product that we needed for retail, right? So if we weren't the grower, the packer, the shipper, the farmer, all of these things all wrapped into one, we couldn't have as easily have given the retailers what they demanded, and it would have been harder for us to market our crop.
And so you guys are more, from the sounds of it, you guys are more closely involved in, you're not so much supplying, onions or crops that go into production of other foods. Are you more direct, your products are being packaged and ready to consume directly by consumers in retail storefronts? Is that your primary business?
Probably 70% of our volume goes directly to retail. And then the balance is what we call food service. So, and there's maybe a portion of that that's processing, and that's being made into something else. Food service is going to go to the back of the kitchen. It's what you're going to eat at the restaurant. Like, nobody really thinks about where the potato or onion or whatever it is that they eat at the restaurant comes from. That comes from what we call the food service industry. So we deliver to a wholesaler, and then they deliver to the restaurant, and then the restaurant does what they do with it in the back of the kitchen.
Okay. So being that you guys are creating produce products, you're not really creating, you're growing produce products that are going directly to consumers like myself in grocery stores. I don't know if you've gotten a lot of questions about this, but I think a lot of people right now are probably wondering, what in the world is going on with food inflation. So people are paying more at the grocery stores, especially for a lot of big produce, dairy, meats. Eggs are like a bad word right now. But can you talk to us a little bit about, is that inflation, was that caused by kind of the effects of COVID or the after effects of COVID, if you will? Or maybe, I don't really know. I can't say that I've noticed a lot of inflationary pressure on onions recently, because that's probably not something that people are focused on. But from the grower side, on the produce side, what type of inflation have you guys experienced just in the input costs that go into your growing and packaging and production?
Right. So what I like to say is it usually takes, I talk in trifectas. It usually takes at least the combination of three events. And this goes back to, aviation studies. Actually, most aviation accidents have three things that went wrong, not one, but three things, the combination of that ended in a fatal accident. And I feel like within logistics, within markets, it really takes something similar. So COVID was one of those adverse effects that did impact pricing. Okay. The second one was, really second and third are environmental. So in the West, we're having dramatic problems with, the last 2 years, we've had very, very difficult springs. We had difficult harvesting conditions in the fall, and that's made it harder for us to maintain average yields. So let's just talk about, if you watched in the San Joaquin Valley, a lot of your folks are probably not watching in that kind of detail, but they had rain. We know all this massive rain that they're getting in the San Joaquin Valley, all the flooding in California. Well, that's going to fill the reservoirs, and that's good for putting snowfall in the mountains so that they have the water later, but it prevents planting now. So those extremes in the weather are actually impacting the short-term ability to plant crops, and that inconsistency makes prices go higher. And then the third thing, I can think of lots more, but water, just environmental conditions. The trucking, actually, when we look at what it was taking for us to deliver product, I mean, obviously the markets are a lot lower right now as far as per mile, but our freight rates were 60-70% higher going to the East Coast, to the in the Southeast, to the similar. It really didn't matter the location. Some of our real regional stuff didn't have, maybe it was a 20% jump, but the long haul trucking was really high. So all of those things combine, and you see them at the market. Now, you spoke about eggs, okay? Eggs, milk, I'm trying to think of potatoes, okay? Those items, and this is interesting, some of the things that you buy in the produce department, I'll use asparagus. This is another crop that we do, for example. What you're paying at retail at the grocery store is probably about what the farmer is getting paid, which is odd. But with asparagus, retailers make very, very little, almost nothing on asparagus, because it's already an expensive item and they can't really add a lot of margin to that. Okay. So when our cost of production, our yields go down and our prices go up, you feel it as a consumer immediately. Okay. But on an onion, the average markup is a minimum of 300%. Okay.
Wow.
So what
Yeah.
they're paying us, what you're paying is 300% more than what the farmer is getting. And it's probably closer. A lot of times we see 800 or 1200% markup at resale versus what the farm's getting. So the retailer is going to absorb a lot of that cost, and you're not going to see that inflation. And that's why the difference.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So generally asparagus is a higher priced item, right, at the stores. So we'll get more of a pass through on those. Whereas on things like onions, the retailers have some ability to flex and absorb some of those exactly. Pass throughs to them instead of passing it on to their customer base. That makes sense. Interesting. So talk to me a little bit about then, you guys obviously have year round products. You're growing something pretty much year round as much as you can, but does that mean you guys don't really experience a peak, or do you still have like a peak season for actually shipping your product out? I know you guys store it. So does it ever stop? Is there ever really like a certain concentration of higher volumes, or is it pretty steady year round?
It's fairly steady. It may change districts. It might change regions, right? We'll ship high volume from Idaho, where I'm sitting today. 1st of September through the end of April, and then we'll shift to Southern California, and then Southern Texas, and then Georgia and New Mexico, right? So we move around, but the total volume shipped is fairly consistent overall.
Okay. And we talked a lot about trucking capacity mixed into that conversation and the inflationary conversation. Probably have quite a few people in the audience or that are going to listen to this that are curious to better understand that. Can you explain to me, since you guys manage your own logistics, because that's part of being vertically integrated, how do you procure that transportation and what do those partnerships look like, and maybe how are they impacted during the last few years with such a volatile freight market?
Yeah, we really didn't try and bring our trucking in-house until, and when I say in-house, I mean working directly with owner operators and other carrier bases until probably about the time COVID started, which is terrible timing from the aspect of trying to make relationships with folks and create loyalty. Because we know that during COVID and the subsequent 18 or 20 months after that it was a trucker's market or a seller's market, if you will. And so it was an extremely difficult time for us to try and begin doing that, because there was very, very little loyalty or consistency. We'd book a rate that was higher than we've ever paid before, and the truck wouldn't show up because he got another load that paid him 10% more than what we had just offered, which was the highest we'd ever offered for that lane ever before anyway. So for us, it's just a function of today's market of just trying to build relationships and work with people who will work with us. That's one of the things about produce. Those that would ever consider, from a trucking standpoint or logistics or a brokerage working in produce, produce is inevitably more volatile than, going to pick up a load of lumber or some other widget that's made in a factory. Because it's just in time. We have to produce that product. We have to put it on the production floor. It has to be ready for you to come and pick up. And we work really hard to do that so we don't delay our trucks, but stuff still happens. And not only can it happen on the loading side, it can also happen on the delivery side, right? Because everyone is working, like everyone gets frustrated with like, well, why these delays? Why do you do this to me? Well, everyone is working on just in time. They have enough. If you bring a load of strawberries in 6 days before you need them, you're going to throw them all away, right? So the supply chain is constantly moving based on what happens in sales and what happens as far as delivery or receipt of product, right? Because you can get something that's not good or out of grade. Onions are not usually that volatile, but it still happens.
I've never honestly considered it in that way, because I know over the last few years we saw a lot of people move away from just in time out of necessity of the market. And so we had people stock up on inventory early so that they wouldn't have to be focused so heavily on trying to run a just-in-time model with trucking capacity being as volatile as it was, and loading and unloading, and warehouses just totally over capacity and all of this stuff. But the produce sector doesn't really get that luxury, because you're right. You can't move food in weeks or days ahead of time, because that's all, especially like you said, if we were talking berries or something, by the time I get my raspberries home from the store, I think I have like 4 days to eat them. So there's such a tight window. And I mean, you guys do watermelons, you do asparagus, all of that stuff probably has a much shorter shelf life than something like a potato or an onion would. So really interesting call out there. I like that. As you've worked with these partners and you've tried to create more partnerships on the trucking and logistics side, just talk to me about what you found. Like, what have you guys found in looking at these partnerships? What are kind of some of the standout moments where you're like, yes, that's going to be a good partner? And what are maybe some of the like a little bit more obnoxious things that you run into where it's less than ideal, and how essentially, I guess just talk to us about that. We know that they're out.
Yeah, you see the smile on my face already. Like this is an interesting thing to be able to talk about. So I'm going to talk about, like, first of all, pet peeves. There's nothing more frustrating than having a carrier and someone that you work with consistently charge you as a shipper for not loading in a timely manner. Okay, so let's take, I've got 2 hours and it takes me 4, and you want to bill me $250. Yet at the same time, the day before, you called me and said, hey, oh, sorry, I lost my truck. He's delayed, or whatever your excuse is. And as a shipper, it's like, sorry, there's no monetary compensation for me. There's no anything. It's like, sorry. Like, for me, what's important about these relationships is that give and take. Like, if you get here and I make you wait, I will do something. But my expectation is that you return that favor later on if something else doesn't happen. It's got to be give and take. There's nothing. I talk to Don, who does our transportation all the time, and he has to be my mediator between myself and whoever we might be working with sometimes, because I lose my mind. I'm a very, very commonsensical, straightforward person. If you're good to us and you treat us fair, I'm going to do the same thing. But when it's your way or the highway every single time, and it's always your way, whether you come through and you have the best rates or not, I don't freaking care. I want someone who understands that things don't work out exactly how you want to every single time. And I'll use an example for this. If we have a reject on product, sometimes I've had carriers make mistakes. The reefer's set too cold and they freeze a load or something like that. And I'll get the product all the way to the destination. The receiver won't take it. And I've gone so far as to find another location. Like, they own that load. It's theirs, right? I've gone so far as to take that load, move it to another location, and get a return. And I've had that company turn around and say, oh, well, you got a full return, so I'm not going to help you, right? So now I just wash my hands of it and say, here's your load. You figure out what to do with it, because people forget, the effort that you make to try and help them. Yeah.
And I think that I would be curious too to understand, you talked about just the sheer volume of shipments that are coming out of the just geographical area that you are in by a lot of different people. And we do have a question. I want to get to that too in a minute. Do you find that maybe it's more difficult to create those loyalty partnerships because there's just so many options available in such a small area for these trucking capacity, providers to essentially choose between? Or
no, I mean, I think it gets easier and easier. So we get larger and larger. The cool thing is the guys that come here, if you've got 15 loads going out every day, right? They can call hey, I'll be in the Treasure Valley. I'll be in Boise in 3 days or 4 days.
Right.
And if you have a carrier that's willing to not know exactly where they're going, but that knows they need a load with a minimum amount of miles, they can call and say, okay, no problem. I'll put you in the slot. I'll have a load for you. You show up in 3 days, and I'll know 24 hours before shipment where that truck's going to go. Those guys are the ones that get the real win, because they can call in and we can line outbound freight with an inbound truck, and we can keep things rolling. But you do still have to have a little bit of flexibility, because we don't know, right? Unlike other items, we basically 48 hours in advance, we know where load 21, of the week is going to go.
Right. Cool. Okay. We got a question. Jacob says, would it be safe to say that we feel these price increases more because produce are more inelastic goods?
For sure. But it depends on the item, right? The eggs, when you go to the grocery store, you're gonna buy them anyway. That's kind of the argument that the retailers make all the time. They know that you're on most items within a certain price point, you're still gonna buy regardless. And so that does have an impact.
Okay, we got another question for you. Would you rather deal with 300 one-truck owner ops or 3 100-truck carriers or 1 300 truck carrier?
Okay, let me read that again. 3 100-truck owner ops or 300 100-truck carriers or 1 3. I think all have their strengths. You know, like if I were to ask Don, who's managing
Don
transportation
is
for us.
Really mad at you.
Yeah, he might be popular
on this podcast.
He loves his like smaller owner operators, maybe a guy that has 6, 8, 10 trucks, but usually because those guys, it's a real win-win for both of us. They appreciate us, we appreciate them. Whereas, you know, a guy with 100 trucks, I mean, if you have someone who really has a truck, you got no problem. What I get frustrated by, and I'll offend half the people that are listening here, there's nothing more. I'm an asset-based broker. Okay. Well, I'm an asset-based farmer in Peru because I buy onions from there to market, you know, like, you know, that gets really frustrating because I understand there's brokers have a place, brokers have an ability. And if you're a broker who does a good job, you're okay. But what does that mean? And to me, if I'm going to pay you more to be a broker, then I would like the service back. I want to know where my truck is. I want to know when it's going to be here. I want to know that his delivery set up. I want to know all of those things. And I don't want to have to call you and ask you. Right. If you want to work for someone as a broker, then you need to work harder because we're paying you. At the end of the day, we're really paying you more than if we go direct.
That's my CEO says that he cold called Don and told him that we were an asset-based broker and mentioned Peru. But I would say that speaking to the brokerage side, obviously, and especially I can see this now that, you know, I've learned more just about produce supply chain, the fact that it is just in time, the fact that there's a lot of freight in the same market that's probably already every day. And so when you're dealing with brokers who predominantly are going to be finding owner operators that are in the market saying, I'm in the market and I want to get out of the market, they're shopping. The brokers are shopping for that capacity. And so there's a lot more volatility in that than finding the guys who are regularly in the market with their 6 to 8 truck fleets, with their 10 truck fleets that are communicating directly with you guys. You're going to probably get the better service from the latter because it's more reliable. And when you have that broker capacity, a lot of times what's happening there is that person that's in the market is someone who just exists to get these one-off loads. And that's, you know, you don't even have to interact directly with that carrier. So to them, you're just the person paying the bill. And if someone else is going to pay them more to get out of the same market, then that's where things kind of obviously fall apart there in that instance. Yeah. So it's just adding in that layer and it's making it a more transactional relationship as opposed to we can regularly count on you in your partnership to keep our 6 to 10 trucks turning every time we're in this market. So I definitely think that makes sense. We are at time, which I mean, this has been an awesome conversation. And I'm loving the comments that I'm seeing here at the end, but I do have anything that you would want to tell people about you, what you're doing. I love what you're doing. You have a really cool TikTok, you know, you have a presence on some social media sites. How can people connect with you? How can people learn more about you and your company and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want more of the business side, I'm on LinkedIn, just as my name says right there, Shay Myers, and at Shay Farm Kid. If you want some real behind the scenes, kind of just daily, and I've been slacking lately. I've been traveling too much, but if you get in there, you'll be able to see like what the produce industry really entails, the effort, the logistics, the time, and the subtleties of what we're doing, and that's. You know, that's what I really like doing. I mean, social media and in today's world, the ability to share and educate. And I don't mean to, and what I want to be really, really careful about is I want to educate. What happens in between farmers and consumers, or even let's talk politics, left versus right, is we tend to look down on people, right? And we tend to talk down to people. That is not my intent. My intent is to try and show you what we're doing. And if I show you what we're doing and how hard it is sometimes, I'm hoping that translates into more dollars back to us as farmers and as operators, and specifically to our farm, because you're going to see that it's worth it. You're going to see how much time we spend. You're going to see everything that we're doing to the extent that I can show you. and it's going to be more meaningful. Plus, I think, frankly, everyone needs to understand more about where their food comes from.
I can't agree more with the last part of that. I've shared some of your videos with my family, and I've been like, can you believe that like this is how this happens? And it's just been so insightful for me to I love the videos of like when you guys are planting and harvesting and you guys are out there and, you know, throwing watermelons and all of the stuff. It's been really cool to watch. So I would highly recommend anybody listening to make sure that they go follow you and just, you know, it's addicting watching some of those videos. So it's really cool. But thank you so much for being here today, Shay. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad my voice held up as well as it was, but you definitely carried the burden with a lot more talking, and I appreciate that. So thank you everybody so much for joining us today for coffee, and we will see you again in 2 weeks.
Catch you guys later.